That's one of the biggest misconceptions that I see is people don't understand that you are basically buying a business. You're buying something with payroll in place, different processes in place, different systems in place. You have clients, which are your tenants, that expect a certain way things are going to get done. And you are coming in and you are buying if you're buying existing multifamily, an existing business, and if you're going to make changes, there are hurdles you're going to have to overcome to put those different changes in place. And even just changing the management company is going to
Yep.
change a lot of things for people. And I don't think that's such a understood thing of like, hey, like you just come in and change management. They have a different way of doing things. So now your tenants are going to have to adopt slightly. And sure, most people don't have a huge problem because it's just, okay, how am I paying rent? It's not that big thing. Or how am I doing maintenance requests? But you start doing a lot of little different things, those things add up. And I think people just think, oh, I just come in and change management. And, it's like, don't miss a beat. But I think that changes a lot. So I think that's really interesting to hear you say that. Because
Yeah,
I
I
think
think a
it's
lot of
huge.
people underestimate the reputation too. I mean, if you're taking over, like you said, a business and it's got a bad reputation, um, there's a lot you got to do to kind of get over that hurdle.
Hmm. Have you guys experienced that a lot?
We have, I mean, we focus on heavy value adds, so most of our properties don't have a good reputation when we buy them. Um, so yeah, we've got to change everybody's perception on the owners and the property.
Hmm. So walk me through a little bit what it was like transitioning from just the construction side to actually going to that ownership side, because that's not a insignificant leap from just working on a property to then now, owning the property, understanding the business plan, having the systems in place, raising money from people. How did you make that transition? How did you think about that transition?
The biggest thing, so the acquisition side of it, let's start there. You got to find a deal to get started, right? The acquisition side, we brought in a lot of things from our single family over to multifamily, and we had success finding deals that way.
Hmm.
Um, I think a lot of multifamily investors don't do, we were calling, we were mailing, doing direct mail. Um, so we had success there. I think the biggest difference was, like I mentioned, the underwriting. So took us a while to get a good grasp on that. And then the biggest thing is we had never raised capital before. We had some couple lenders, a couple private lenders that pretty much funded all our single family fix and flips,
Hmm.
but we hadn't raised millions of dollars. So that was a big learning curve. Mindset, just talking freely to individuals about how much money they have and how much they want to invest. Um, that was a whole mindset shift.
Gotcha. I think it's interesting. John, when you transitioned from the same thing, but broker to owner, was there anything for you that was hard to overcome or super challenging or anything similar?
Not really. But then again, I'm also the one that from when I was super young. I take a test and I walk out of the test and everyone's like, "Wow, that was hard." I'm like, "What do you mean? I never thought anything was hard in my life. I never thought anything was challenging." But you get your grade back 2 days later and you get a 34, and you're like, "I guess it was pretty hard. I guess I was wrong." So yeah, no, there's nothing I can point to that was challenging. The only thing that I talk about all the time was going from a broker where you're an expert in one zip code, knowing every owner, the sales of every building, and there being 5,000 properties in a zip code in New York. You take that and you go out of state and you realize that there are 500 buildings in Jacksonville that would check off 150 units or more, whatever. You get 500 properties and they're all over a major geographical region, and then you have to know the difference between the north side, the east side, the west side, the south side, the southeast side, the north, and then even inside those submarkets, there's the right side of the tracks and the wrong side of the tracks. So that was probably the biggest challenge, and that's something that you can only do so much research online. You got to go there, you got to feel it, you got to see it, you got to touch it. So other than that component, because you get a deal sent to you, you live in Dallas, you live in Miami, you live in New York, you live in Los Angeles, you live in Cleveland. If the deal is not in your backyard, you underwrite it. The numbers on the paper are going to tell you part of the story. The Google image search is going to show you one side of the story. The school reports that you can get are going to show you one side of the story. You get to the property and you realize that you're in a war zone. You may miss that in your underwriting because it doesn't really show the true depiction of what the actual property looks like. So that's the only thing that I can point to that was complicated, where it's, this deal makes so much sense. You get there, you're like, oh my God, I do not want to buy here. I mean, there was, one property I toured early on, 2014, and this is coming from Philadelphia, buying properties that were borderline dangerous. I remember we walked a property where I told the person in the passenger seat, I said, get in the driver's seat and keep the car on because this is rough. And then we opened the manager's office and it was like going into Fort Knox. He had like 37 cameras, like everything was monitored. And I'm like, yeah, nah. It was 12 o'clock in the afternoon and there was, 75 cars in the parking lot. I'm like, I don't think this is what I want to buy. So, but that's something that you got to see, feel, and touch it. I don't think you can get a true understanding of an area by just doing it online. I mean, even our deal in Jackson, Mississippi was across the street from the Starbucks and a Whole Foods and super high-end retail. Now you go across the highway under the overpass, night and day. Now, yes, it path of progress. I get it, but you got to feel it. So I think that's the one thing where I would say was, complicated. And only time heals that wound. I don't think that's something you just pick up by, doing a couple extra Google searches. So but that's from my standpoint.
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting now that I've been in real estate for 4 or 5 years, whatever it is, but especially the last 3 years is I've experienced that more. And you go to different, because we're in New York and we do everything out of state, but as you go to different markets, you drive around different neighborhoods, you look at deals and you start paying attention to a lot of that stuff. I've now brought that back to now, even when I'm driving around like neighborhoods on Long Island or, when I was in Brooklyn, and you just start noticing those little differences. I think people, when you're not watching for it, you don't even realize it's necessarily a thing until it's like a big difference. You're like, oh, this is, way worse than where it was. But there's so many slight differences of just like you could be driving down, a highway or, a main road, and all of a sudden you cross an intersection and it doesn't get way worse, but it just takes a half step down because you just look at the retail, you look at how clean it is, you just get a certain feeling for that. And that's something you would never necessarily get when you're on Google Maps or Google Streets. So I think that stuff is hugely important because like you said, especially if you're going to do it out of state, if you're locally, and George, I don't know if you guys only do in Dallas or I think you guys do in other markets in Texas as well.
We do. Yeah, no, it's a great point what John just said. And we went through that as well because we underwrote so many deals in Dallas and we just didn't feel comfortable buying at the prices that we're selling here in Dallas. So we started looking outside of markets and yeah, man, it's you make a left on one street and you make a right on that same street. It's night and day, depending where you're at. And I think that's in most markets. There's a lot we do before we actually physically go there. I mean, we take it to the point where we even call the police stations and we talk to the local police and they're usually pretty helpful, but still, I mean, we've been to a couple of them that we thought on paper looked great. We had looked around on Google Maps and made phone calls and everything. We did get some red flags with the phone calls. But once we got there, we were like, yeah, no way. Yep. We actually showed up. We were touring a bunch of properties that day and we showed up. It was pretty late, maybe like around 8 o'clock. And man, we did not feel safe walking around that property. And yeah, it's just one of those things.
No, I tell people that all the time. I mean, you gotta, go after hours and see what's going on because the truth with anything is that, anything can look really good when a broker is about to do a tour or an owner is going to tour you through it because he knows you're coming. Go there, if you get into town early, go there that night. If you're there late, stay later. But, I mean, you can fall in love with a deal and then underwrite it and find out it's shit, or you can fall in love with a deal underwriting it and see it and realize it's no good. is there a right or wrong way to do it? No. If you're in your backyard and you don't mind taking a ride, don't waste your time underwriting. Go drive the deal. If you're out of state, you probably can't do it that way. So you got to make it make sense. And you could fall in love with numbers on a paper, but you got to put eyes on something. You got to see, feel, and touch it. And you can't see, feel, and touch it for 35 minutes to an hour and a half with a broker or an owner. It's going to appear its best. The owner's going to all the bad tenants, say, stay inside, don't come out, don't do this. I'll take $20 off your rent. Like, he's trying to get rid of it. So especially the heavy lifting stuff, because we do the same thing. So you got to be aware of that. And when you buy that, you got to realize that, like you said before, your reputation, you're not just shaking that off by putting a sign in the ground, right? Like, there's a lot that comes with fixing that stuff. And that's the stuff that, how do you underwrite it when a broker says the market occupancy is 97%? Well, yes, that's perfectly stable, clean 2015, 2020 built property. Show me a 1970s deal that was taken over from a guy that owned it for 20 years and it was ran into the ground. That's not running at 97%. So those are things that you just got to be aware of. And I think the easiest way to do that, like I said, is you got to get there. You got to see it. You got to see, feel, and touch it. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and just understand where you get yourself involved in. Because that is by far the most challenging thing out of state, because you don't know what you don't know. And when you get there, you have these high expectations, and it typically doesn't work that way. And we joke around about it. I don't like driving our investors to our properties because they're not necessarily the nicest. They're not the sexy properties. The sexy properties are the ones downtown that have elevators and pools and cabanas and golf simulators. If we put a golf simulator in a property, I mean, that would just be, it would be a weapon. The golf clubs would use as weapons. So you have to understand that. You gotta know what you know and know what you don't know. And the only way to figure that out is to get there, see, feel, and touch it, walk it, see what happens.
Yeah.
I think it's important. It's funny you mentioned Houston and turning. I do remember at one point when we were in Houston looking at a deal, we were like driving down and we were like, I think you could see like a bunch of retail on the right-hand side and there was just nothing on the left. We're like, are we turning right or left? And we ended up turning left. We were just like, shit.
Yeah, Houston's a whole other monster just because of the zoning and
Yeah,
that was one of the only places that I toured. When I went home, I was like, oh my God, there's a lot of property here. Like, it's just, and you could be in the same submarket and one block over. I mean, we've owned in a ton of markets, and I've been in a lot of different places. And that was one market I left. I said, that might be a little too big. There's a lot of moving parts here.
Yeah, it takes a lot to get used to that market.
Yeah. So I have a question which might be helpful for somebody listening. How well did you know Houston before you started looking in that area?
Didn't know it at all.
So how did you then go through that process of educating yourself on the area? Did you try to get construction work there? Did you just start driving there? Like, what was that process like for you?
Looking at the data, first of all, the research and what's the population growth, what's the crime, what's everything, right? Then once I had a good feeling about that, and I knew we wanted to be there, at least number-wise, I knew we wanted to be there. Then it was going over there, taking trips, touring properties, touring the city in general, the areas, the submarkets. It took a while to feel comfortable with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing is so many people want to drive there once or go and visit a market, and you go see the deal, drive a couple blocks, see little things, and you feel comfortable. The amount I've learned in certain markets over 3-4 years of just consistently looking at stuff there, every time you look at a new deal, you just learn something new or slightly different, or you learn a new neighborhood. And, you have rough ideas of rough areas, but until you really like dig in to a market or a specific neighborhood or a specific deal, you don't really know that area until you get in there. I mean, in markets, we're in Jacksonville and Columbus, we probably know that market like 20-25% of it. And John's been in Columbus for 5-6 years. We've been in Jacksonville for about 3 or 4. That's not that much. There's still so much we don't know. And somebody coming into a new deal, I mean, you're just consistently learning more, picking up new things, or, things change too over the years. So you've got to stay on top of things. So I think it's so important to, dig in and understand exactly where you're buying.
Yeah, I think it's very important to talk to the locals. Like every time we go to tour property, we're talking to everybody. If we're staying at a hotel, we're talking to everybody that's working there, and we ask them about the areas, and anywhere we stop, we're talking to the locals and just getting their feel for it as well.
I
That
don't
usually
think that's
helps.
something that's done enough, right? Because
Yeah.
anyone can take the regular expenses and market rate stuff. Anyone can put it in a spreadsheet, right? That's not when you first underwrite a deal and you're underwriting a 100 unit, it's a little bit harder, and then a 300 unit, and you have a lot of rent roll, you have a lot of data. But the part that gets lost is that, right? When you get to a property, it's not just the physical property, it's everything surrounding there. Whether you're getting food, you're talking to the waitress, or the waiter. When you're getting a drink at night, you're talking to the bartender. When you're eating dinner, you're talking to this person. When you're at the hotel, you talk to the person checking you in. When you see people that are around, you just grab them and, hey, what's going on here? What do you like? I don't think people do that enough on their first deal, right? After you want a deal on a market, if you buy a deal similar, maybe you don't have to do it as much. But if you're new to a market, there is nothing better than local intel. I mean, these people see, feel, and touch it and breathe it day in and day out. And they're going to say, oh, my God, no, never go to that side of town. It's never going to get any better. And then flip side, they may say, oh, no, this is where everyone's talking about it. And I think that people don't do that enough, because there's nothing better than local intel when you're just, what's going on, right? What do you want to know? And they're going to tell you the stuff that you're not going to get in the reports. You're not going to get it in the data. They're not going to – they're going to tell you the stuff that matters, that could be a very good persuasion to buy or not to buy based on – you can't talk to one person and make a decision. You talk to a couple people, 5, 10, 20 people, whatever it is, you're going to really learn. I mean, even at the airport, when you land and you're waiting for your flight to go home, or even there, you're talking to people that, if they're getting on a plane, that means they're either traveling to or from the location. Or why are you coming here? What are you doing here? Oh, no, we have a huge headquarters here, whatever it is. But those are people that are traveling there. So there's something going on. You want to know what's going on. If they're getting on your flight going home, well, then they're from where you are. So you want to know what they're doing there, right? And that's all data that, underwriting, that's not numbers on paper. That's more, the feeling side of it, does it feel good or does it not? And that can only be done by asking the questions and talking to as many people as you can.
Yeah, I can give you a quick example on that. We toured one property that numbers were looking amazing, and it was a heavy lift. There was a lot of work that needed to be done. And when we toured it, we saw the potential in the property, like the physical property. And then we still weren't quite sure about the area. It looked like maybe it was transitioning, but couldn't quite tell. A couple blocks down, we saw some police officers. So we pulled up next to them, just started talking to them and asking them about the area. And then we asked them about the apartment and that specific area. And, man, they were just like, don't do it. Like they told us straight up, they're like, nah, man, we're there every freaking day. He's like, look, it may transition, but we're talking years from now. We didn't go solely 100% off of that, but it definitely helped us make our decision.
So because I think it's interesting, I've not heard somebody else tell me that they call the local police station. When you call, what is that conversation like? Do you tell them, hey, we're looking at buying X, Y, and Z property. We're just trying to see, what the crime is like? Like, how does that conversation go? Because I think it's interesting.
Basically what you said. And then sometimes they'll tell us, oh, you know what, you need to speak to so-and-so. That's their area. And then they'll put us in touch with them. Or sometimes they'll know right off the bat. Super helpful. Like,
typically the apartment world, if you make a call to the local precinct or whatever, and hey, I'm buying 123 Main Street, they're like, oh yeah, 3-4 times a day domestic violence, or oh yeah, no, we're there all the time for gunshots. Like, they're going to be the ones that they're going to tell you the worst of the worst, right? Mm-hmm. They're going to say, hey, now you got to remember, like George said, that's worst of the worst. If that worst of the worst is they're saying, oh, it's never, okay, now let's find out the good stuff. Then you got to make a risk reward decision. But yeah, anytime you have those conversations, you give them an address and they're going to say, oh, oh yeah, we haven't been there, in 2 years or whatever it is. I mean,
Exactly.
those are things you want to hear. You don't want to
Mhm.
necessarily, or maybe you do want to hear that they're there every day because you can possibly fix that. Then the question is, what, if they're there at your property every day, well, what about the surrounding? Oh, we're never there. Those are managed really well, right?
Yeah.
Then
Yeah, that's a great. Yeah, that's
that's
usually what we try
gold.
to.
You hear
Yep.
that, and you're like, okay,
Yep.
I can fix this problem, right? I just got to
Yep.
clean up my shit. If they're like, oh no, it's just another day in South whatever, you got to think twice about it, right? If every complex has constant calls and constant police activity, then think about what you're doing. But for the most part, you want to see what your site has and then what everyone else. Okay, well, tell me more. And you just it's like anything else, right? It's you got to ask the question, and if you don't know you're asking the right question, just tell them to elaborate. Just you could say well, tell me more like 4 or 5 times, and they'll probably keep going before you even ask another question. So you just want to find out more about your property, local properties, areas, good, bad, and different.